Professor Richard Wolff drops by to talk about mortgaging our economy to Wall Street. It's pretty grim. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books. His latest, Understanding Socialism. rdwolf.com with two F's is another of his websites. Prof Wolff, PROFWOLFF, is his Twitter handle. And Professor Wolff, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us every week here. I find these conversations so useful. This piece in Huffington Post, "Federal Regulators Are Mortgaging the Country to Wall Street," is pretty shocking. I know you've read it. Nearly 300 pages of loopholes and exemptions to the Volcker Rule and Dodd-Frank. This all sounds kind of arcane as I drop this setup here. Translate this into English for us. What does this mean?
Well, it's a kind of think of it as a kind of replay of history. A bad story, not taken seriously, and so it comes back to bite us again. Let me explain.
Okay.
In the depths of the Great Depression, back in the 1930s, a banking bill was finally pushed through Congress, and it was designed to reduce the systemic risk that came from the fact that banks had been free to take the money of their depositors and not merely hold it and keep accounts for them, but in fact to speculate with other people's money. And it was felt that that had contributed to the breakdown in 1929 and the horrible Great Depression. So the Banking Act, passed in the 30s, created a wall. It was called a wall of separation. Two kinds of banks: a commercial bank that simply took deposits and made short-term loans to businesses, versus an investment bank, a completely different thing, that did not take deposits and that could go out and speculate, but with money that people gave it for that purpose. And that was felt to be a useful wall of separation. Immediately when the bill was passed, it was opposed by the banking industry. They went to work to evade it. After a while, they weakened it, and in the 1990s, they felt strong enough to make a frontal assault, and they got the bill. It was called Glass-Steagall, after the people in the Senate and the House who had pushed it through. They got it repealed, and Bill Clinton, as president, signed the repeal. Okay, fast forward. That happened, by the way, at the end of the 1990s. By 2008, everything that we had predicted happened. By having ended the controls and the regulations that had been passed, we had another doozy collapse. In the aftermath of that, here comes the repetition of history. We had the Dodd-Frank bill that put a number of weak controls and regulations on the banks again, and for the same reason, namely that they had contributed to the chaos of 2008. And again, the banks opposed it. And when they couldn't block it, they went to work to weaken it and stall it and evade it, which they did until this last week, when they finally succeeded with a pliant Trump administration to get several of the key and the only few remaining limits on the bank to be relaxed. It's roughly the equivalent of canceling Glass-Steagall back in the 1990s. It's a horrible rerun. It allows the banks here at a very dangerous time to take much more risk than they had been allowed to take before. And you have to shake your head at a system so dependent on private capitalist banks that even when they do the worst kind of disaster, illegal, unethical, speculative, they are powerful enough to get a pliant political system to take away the few constraints that their terrible performance put on them in the heat of the breakdowns.
Yeah, it is pretty breathtaking. What does this mean for the average American who has their money in the bank or has a certificate of a deposit or needs a bank to get access to their paychecks?
Well, what it's doing is it's telling them, if they pay attention, that the level of risk that they are undertaking when they interact with banks is now much higher than it was a week ago. The banks are now able to do things, speculative things, risky things that they had been limited or blocked from doing before. Nobody says anything. No one's going to pay you a nickel more to hold your money. It's just that the banks are now free to take more risk. That's always been their position. They do not want their risks limited. They want the bailout when the risks they take don't work out. We have that unspeakable arrangement in this country where the bankers insist they're efficient and they're the best risk takers, and then every time when they really mess up, we are all on the hook to bail them out. And here you have, again, more and more risk. And by the way, the difference is we are now at a very, very dangerous time throughout the world, partly because of the global crash of capitalism and partly because of the pandemic. So it would be a time when you would probably, if you are half rational, want there to be less risk. But no, the banks have their own agenda. This is good for their bottom line. Their literature is full of that. They don't even hide it. That's what they want. You know, we live in a time when this system is breaking down, and it's every institution for itself. The banks saw a chance with Trump and with the Democrats unwilling to be really oppositional to get this kind of thing done, and so they went for it. And we're all going to live with the extra risk, and then when it crashes next time again, we will hear all the moaning and wailing, and whatever the next wave is will once again put on a reform which the banking sector will try to stop, and if it can't stop it, it will follow by evading it, then weakening it, and when they can get it done, get rid of it, which is what they did again last week.
So would people be advised to put their money in credit unions and locally owned banks, small banks that don't engage in this kind of speculation, as opposed to the big national banks? Is that and does the FDIC protect investors any longer?
Well, the problem with there are a number of questions here. The credit union is always more cautious than any bank, small, medium, or large. So if you want caution, then the credit union. But remember, we are living in a time of enormous unemployment, and many credit unions have loans out to people who cannot pay them back. And the danger for credit unions is also there. You might have a bit less of a speculative risk, but you are now more in danger of the more systemic collapse coming and biting you that way. Small banks are so locked into big banks that you don't get much more safety from them because of their interdependence with the big ones. So I think you have to face the fact that this is a banking system that plays the game with politics. They take risks as much as they can, and if they want to make more money and take bigger risks, they just have to go to the political leadership and get that done. That's what they did this week. There's really very, very little that we as a people can do about it. Individually escaping from this, I wish there were some mechanism, some little nostrum, some advice I could give you. But I hate to do this, but the only honest answer about that is you've got to change this system. I mean, let me underscore it another way, Thom. Everything is breaking down because the tenants aren't paying the rents and the landlords aren't paying back their loans. It's kind of everybody for themselves. And in that situation, whatever the system offered before in the way of orderliness, even that is now being taken away.